just talking about it. I know you told me.
Okay.
Oh, how to
And
do fundraising.
also with us is Grace Wright, who is an MBA, as a Fort Collins native. She teaches social enterprise and corporate sustainability with the Impact MBA program at CSU. Her really has started her own business, Grace Wright Ventures, and used crowdfunding as a way to get that started. So she likes to share her passion with other entrepreneurs who are looking about getting their businesses started. And Sean Orner is a 3-year member of the Poudre Wilderness Volunteers. She works with the Public Outreach Committee. She was involved in the crowdfunding program that was used this spring. So I'm going to turn the time over to Jeff to share a little bit more about the crowdfunding project that Poudre Wilderness Volunteers did this spring as a way to raise funds for trail restoration efforts in the wilderness areas that they work in. I think you'll find that this will be an interesting dialogue. We've got a few slides to share, some comments, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers to the audience. So Jeff, go ahead.
So can you folks see my screen?
Yep, it's on.
Good. I'll go to the beginning versus the end. How does that sound, Randy?
Yeah, that's probably good.
Well, Randy,
All right,
thanks for
take it away, Jeff.
allowing the three of us to kind of share the learnings of the past 2 months. I just want to spend a minute or so kind of giving a background on what we affectionately call ourselves as PWV. It's easier to say than Poudre Wilderness Volunteers. So we're located in Fort Collins, Colorado, founded in 1996. We have no paid staff and we're funded solely by donations. And we were built in 1996 really to fill a gap in the resource needs within the United States Forest Service. So we've been at this for a while. And in 96, we started off with 40 people. And I'm trying to go down, Randy. How do I advance? Let me try this.
Click.
There we go. So we have over 300 active members right now. So we've grown tremendously, a lot of dedicated folks ranging in age from teenagers to people in their 80s. We cover a bunch of miles within the Canyon Lakes Ranger District. And over the course of time, we contributed 340,000 volunteer hours at the value of about $7 million. We hike. We use stock. We have a restoration crew. We have an invasive weed group, which is stellar in what they do. So it kind of gives you a brief background on us. And if you'd like to learn more, please don't hesitate to go to our website. Randy asked that we include the contact information for both Sean, Grace, and myself in case there's any questions for us, moving forward. So within this slide, these are our contacts. So we had an extraordinary last really 12 months within kind of this area of Colorado. And I'm not sure if many folks are aware of the Cameron Peak fire, but it hit pretty hard in August. A 4-month rigorous fire that turned into the largest fire in the history of Colorado, burning almost 209,000 acres. This data is from the Forest Service, so it's accurate, it's real. It involves the bear report. A bunch of teams are involved in supporting and taking care of the suppression efforts. And where PWV really gets involved now is there's 120 miles of damaged trails, with 41 of those being designated as severely burned. So we have some trail restoration to do, and we also have some bridge work to do. As a point of reference, in 2012, we dealt with another forest fire that was about 1/3 the size of this, and we repaired 7 bridges ranging in cost from $1,000 to $75,000. So this became extraordinary for us, and I really like the image the Forest Service put up here. That's a picture of downtown Fort Collins during the peak of the fire. Many of us were homebound during this time just because of breathing. So that's kind of the foundation of what drove us to think about we need money, because this is way above what we normally do in our managing our donation pool of money. So we set a goal to raise $25,000. And the two real reasons is we need some young, strong backs. So we needed additional labor to work the trails and also help with the bridges. And if you haven't been keeping up with the news, the cost of lumber has either gone up 2 or 3 times due to a lot of home construction projects during the pandemic. So if you think about spending $1,000 to $75,000 10 years ago, these numbers have tripled. So we needed more money. So we launched a campaign beginning of April, and through Grace Wright, who will share some insights on leading practice on GoFundMe or crowdfunding campaigns, we opted to go with GoFundMe. We established a 4-week program. Towards the end of the last week, a major newspaper wrote an article on us, and we saw a surge in donations and volunteers. So we extended another 2 weeks. But the cool thing is we reached our goal of $25,000 after just 14 days. And a total of 345 donors. And these last 2 bullet points I think are really telling because it showed the concern of the impact of the fire. So we can track where the donations came from, and they came from 34 different Colorado cities. So really the state cared about this. And we also had contributions from 15 different states, ranging from Alaska to Florida, as far away as Maine. A lot of that has to do with our email campaign where our members reached out to their friends and family. But that's kind of a quick snapshot of this. And Randy, I think I'm going to close the screen here so we can talk to each other, or the PowerPoint. And do I give it back to you, Randy, or you want to take it? There you go.
Well, did Grace or Sean want to make any comments before we open it up for questions?
Well, I think we had planned on talking through a few of the best practices for crowdfunding. Is that what you would like to do next, or do you want to have question and answer first?
Yeah. No, let's go ahead and please do.
Okay, so as Jeff said, we had what I consider a very successful crowdfunding campaign. And a lot of people are interested in crowdfunding. The reason why I know anything about crowdfunding is a while ago, quite a few years ago, crowdfunding surpassed venture capital as one of the main ways that early stage businesses were funding their startups. So as an entrepreneurship teacher and someone who consults with startups, it's an area that I work around a lot and have seen really successful strategies in crowdfunding, as well as a whole lot of not successful strategies. So I teach like special little courses on crowdfunding at CSU. I think I came up with kind of a few suggestions. I'm also going to throw into the chat a list of 2020, I think, crowdfunding statistics. And these kind of statistics will give you some ideas about like what more successful strategies are, what the average word count should be for your page and stuff like that. So that will go into a lot of detail, but I'll just give a few of the major takeaway or major things to remember if you're engaging in a crowdfunding campaign. I think the first thing to ask is, do I have a compelling call to action? So often, annual fundraisers, stuff like that, they don't do very well on a crowdfunding platform. If you have, in Fort Collins, we had this huge fire that, people couldn't breathe. The sky was orange. It decimated a lot of our favorite.
Max, it's okay.
Amanda, Amanda, we can't hear you.
Right?
If you want to mute.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, you're good. So yeah, we had this compelling thing. This pain was really present in people, and we knew that they were going to start getting back outside. And so we thought, okay, we have a compelling call to action, a reason that people might give. So again, if you're thinking you just might want to do a general fundraiser for your organization, it's probably not a good fit for a crowdfunding campaign. But if you have a specific thing that you're raising money for, or something that's very timely, that might be a really good fit for a crowdfunding campaign. Another thing we talked a lot about is setting a goal and how much money you should be raising. People are more likely to give money to crowdfunding campaigns that look successful. And so, while you might think an ambitious goal is a good idea, actually on the opposite is true in crowdfunding. You want to be able to hit your goal pretty quickly and surpass it, because people are far more likely to give when there's momentum than when there's no momentum. It's like when you throw a party, I want a small space with a lot of people, not an enormous space with with the same amount of people. You want things to feel full and successful. So we really went back and forth on the goal. What do we think we can raise in the first few days of the campaign? Another thing to consider is the timing. If you look at the crowdfunding statistics, there are more successful months to launch crowdfunding campaigns. People are already over asked during the holidays. So there's certain times of year that people are more likely to give. There's also certain days of the week that people are more likely to give. So generally you want to launch your crowdfunding campaign midweek rather than on the weekend when people's eyes are on their computer. We also talked a lot about the length of the campaign. Crowdfunding campaigns that have an end date, that have a pretty set time frame, are more likely to get money than something that's just like open forever. So we really pushed this 30 days. As Jeff said, we got some last minute great press, and so we extended it a little. But there's some urgency created in the crowdfunding campaign. Probably the number one thing that I think made this crowdfunding campaign successful was preparation. One of the crowdfunding sites said there's like this fallacy that if you post it, they will come. And that's not true with crowdfunding. You put up your crowdfunding campaign, but like most of the people who get there at the beginning are people that have committed to you in advance. So we did a lot of work that we'll talk about with contacting businesses, contacting individuals, and getting them to commit ahead of time to sharing our campaign and to giving on day one. So I'd say we spent did we spend 9 months?
Almost, yeah.
About 9 months preparing for this, not full time, but about 9 months really putting this together, thinking through the video, thinking through the wording, putting together our contact lists, reaching out to those contacts, drafting the right wording, and then pressed go. But before we pressed go, we knew we were about 20%, maybe less than that. We knew we were about 10% of the way to our goal day one. We felt prepared. Yeah, another thing with just another little thing that we worked hard on that I think PWV did really well was recognizing that it's actually not about the organization, that it's about the donor and how they're connected to the cause. So, we really actually, if you look at our crowdfunding campaign, we have just a pretty little small blurb about PWV, and the video is all about nature and about the forest fire, a couple lines about PWV. We spent like a whole meeting talking about the name of our campaign. It was Rebuild Your Favorite Trails. So people are like, oh, this is about rebuilding these things that I care about. And then, coming up with a communication plan. I think Jeff and Sean will talk about that. And then, there's a lot of launch strategy like after you've launched, but campaigns that regularly update donors are more likely to get donations. But I hope that crowdfunding statistics link will be helpful as kind of a starting point. But there's a lot of great guides on GoFundMe, on Indiegogo, and some of the other crowdfunding sites about best practices around crowdfunding. But yeah, come up with a compelling call to action. Remember, it's about the donor, not about you. Prepare, prepare, prepare. And yeah, I don't know. I'll pass it off to Jeff to talk a little bit about, or if people have questions, we can take those. Otherwise, Jeff was going to talk about who we reached out to and kind of how our communication plan works.
Yeah, please do. And then folks in the audience, if you would just type in some questions in the chat, we'll either call on you, have you ask it there, or raise your hand if you do have a question. And we'll give you a chance to ask it to our experts. But you've talked about preparation. So Jeff, would you talk a little bit about that preparation, what materials you put together, and who you put on your contact list?
Sure. I will weave in both timing and I guess what we call channels to kind of communicate this. And I'll cover more the old-fashioned traditional media side. And Shauna is our pro on social media. So she and I tag team this pretty heavily. And if there's one theme I would use for a 4-week period, if you've never seen the movie, I guess 9 of them now, Fast and Furious, that's what it felt like for 4 weeks. It was pretty hectic. So we launched, end of March. So our channels we pulled together emails that were sent to our PWV mailing list, which is 1,000 people. So in preparing for that, it took time for really Grace to help us with the wording, but we put that out a week before the campaign, and then we put out a reminder the day of. So emails to our membership so they could help spread the word and share the links to the campaign. The other channels, more on the traditional side, were the newspapers, the radio stations, and the TVs stations. So we constructed a media release and sent it to everybody a month before the event, just to give them a heads up it's coming. And no one responded back to my email, right? But then we sent the press release again the day of, and that's when Fast and Furious started. All 4 major networks did a story on us. All the major newspapers throughout, really from Denver and all the surrounding regions, did stories. In fact, we had to scramble to get them in so we could do video on site. So it was really, quote, Fast and Furious. 4 major radio stations covered us. We also dealt with reaching out to other nonprofits like ours. And surprisingly, 3 or 4 of them publicized this in their newsletters, which can be a bit risky because it could come off as poaching money from their membership. But this is such a big fire. We got a lot of support from the other nonprofits. So, but preparing the wording took a lot of time for all this. And then we also pushed out a newsletter during the campaign. So there was communication before, there was communication during, and communication after. We were shocked by the enthusiasm by the traditional media. Sean, any comments on social media?
I think Sean might have dropped off accidentally.
I can cover that a little bit.
I can as well, Jeff, if you want.
Super. We have a pretty strong presence with Facebook and Instagram, and then we also kind of toyed around with Nextdoor. But I think we got the biggest push through Facebook. And one channel I forgot to mention is local organizations. So 4 major retailers got very active with us and pushing out our message on Instagram and Facebook. They made financial donations. They posted some of our videos on YouTube. And to see the lift on our folks logging into both Facebook and Instagram surged during that time. So that's one group I don't want to forget about, is reach out to your local retailers because they had a passion about this as well.
So Jeff, we've got a question about your media contacts. How did you decide which radio stations, newspapers, TV stations to contact, and what was your interaction with them?
So I reached out to every single one I could in the state of Colorado, every newspaper, every radio station, and every TV station. In fact, I even reached out to a couple in Wyoming. So it was really based around the media release. And some of those folks I had no contact, but what I did was I attached the media release to what I thought, and I'm a little bit biased here because I wrote it, but a pretty compelling intro to the media release. And I'll be darned if almost every single one of them reached back to us. Most shockingly, the TV stations, but it was a cold call, for lack of a better word. And because the story was compelling, as Grace said. And as I talk about this, all the radio or all the TV stations have called us back within the last week because they want to do a follow-up story. So just once again, the whole impact of the fire on so many people and 600,000 acres that people enjoy to hike. It was a pretty easy conversation, Randy.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that answered the question. It's back to Grace's point. I mean, the message has got to be about the event and the impact of the person, not about PWV. I'd be willing to share the media release. I'd be willing to share any intro comments I used if someone needs those in the future. And I try to personalize it per each of either the newspaper. One learning we picked up was a town called Greeley, Colorado. They wanted to, and they did, publish the story, but they wanted to make sure local folks in Greeley were involved. So it really helped with volunteer recruitment because we went local more than just the Front Range. The other thing we did within the campaign is GoFundMe sent an automatic thank you to every donor. One of our fund development chairman sent a personal email to every single person thanking them, and he personalized it. So 345 folks got an email from us, personalized. We also worked very hard on our website. So when you logged into the homepage, basically the campaign screamed at you. And so you could really link through our website as well. So
I know this is pretty fresh, but do you have any sense as to how many of these donors are going to want to engage in your organization in the future? And how many of them have made multiple donations at this point?
Well, if you look at, I think we have of the 100% total donors, 86% are new donors. So that's a good big number. And we've parked all those folks in our Donor Snap database so we can communicate with these people as well. One afterglow of the event is we basically are hosting 9 or 10 community work days. The month of June work days sold out in 2 days because so many people want to come help volunteer. We have half a dozen private organization work days that we're hosting for people to do team building events for their company. And we only bring in a new class in PWV once a year. And that's something I think we need to take a look at. But we had, I can't put a number on it, Randy, but more than probably 20 people saying, I want to join PWV. So as I ramble here a bit, one point I want to make is that this has been really a humbling experience for us, but we need to be aware of 12 months from now. You know, when kind of things calm down a bit, who knows what the forest fire season will bring. But I think the next couple of years, we need to be aware of how do we keep this momentum going. And that's something on our radar screen because this happened so fast. And like I said, we were humbled by the number of people wanting to volunteer and the financial donations. we're good.
So yeah, you're up to $47,000 in the course of the 3 or 4 weeks that you've run the campaign. And I know one of those was a big donor who offered $10,000. So talk a little bit about the interaction with those donors.
Yeah, I would guess it was interesting. If you look at the number of anonymous donors, it was probably 10 to 12%. So we really can't reach back out to those folks. But the remaining folks will receive our newsletters. Like I said, we sent a bunch of thank you notes. And if I could have had the time, I would have shared at least 30 responses back we got. One said, Colorado's strong. One person said, my knees are bad, I can't hike anymore, but here's $500. So it's more heartwarming to hear the feedback from people. But the donors, I think we're going to think through how do we manage the communication with these folks and see who want to continue to opt into our emails and newsletters, because we give them the option to opt out, obviously. This is still raw, Randy. Go ahead.
Was your question also how we got those donors or the donor management afterwards?
A little bit of both, but how did you network the request to an audience? What audiences did you choose? How did you get that information out to them and
Yes.
to generate the donation?
Yes, we broke it down.
I was just going to say, I would compare, crowdfunding to kind of like throwing a pebble in the water and the ripples that you have. And so when you do the first donations, it's your immediate network. So like people on all our first donors were people on our fundraising team, and then their networks right outside of that. So like people who are already on the PWV membership. Then the network outside of that, it might be the people who have subscribed to PWV, but that aren't members or that have been involved in some way. But success in a crowdfunding campaign requires all of those people sharing with their networks. So a big part of the strategy is asking people, like knowing who your immediate network is that's going to donate. But as Jeff said, that was only a small percentage of people who donated. It was people sharing with their networks and doing a compelling ask. So, if you're thinking of a crowdfunding campaign or engaging in one, I actually would map out that kind of network list and ask, how am I going to get from here to here, from here to here, from here to here? There's a lot of like ask strategies, like direct emails are far more successful than social media posts. So when we asked people, would you be willing to share this on day one once we launch, we provided them both with a social media post and with email copy that they could easily put in and adjust so that they could send it out to their networks. Jeff, what were you going to say?
Exactly right. I was going to echo what you said. It was basically a copy and paste. So the first wave went to 350 PWV folks, asking them a week in advance, please share this with your friends. And it's so easy to do. Copy and paste, here are the links. And then we sent another email the day of to 600 friends of PWV mailing list that we had, asking them to contribute if they would, and also to share. So that's where we had 1,000 people sending it to their friends. But we did the same with the organizations, 4 or 5 of those. Would you please post or share? One thing Grace and I kind of kicked around is how active do we get in a GoFundMe campaign with businesses? And I think what we opted to do is to keep it very select. And everything we promote, this is very much an individual campaign, not a business-driven campaign. So that was a conscious decision on our part. And then I think the other surprise we had, if you saw the revenue lift and the volunteer lift after the newspapers and the TV stations did their thing, that caught us off guard. A bit more of a surge than we thought. So
So I do understand that after the campaign started, that you generated the initial donations, and that large initial donations created another tidal wave of media interest. So would you describe that and the kind of the ripple effect that that second wave of media interest had?
Well, it's almost an arms race, right? Because ABC posted their video on a Friday, 1 week after the campaign started. The next day I get a call from Fox News saying, we want to come video it. So they published their story on Sunday. 2 days later, I get a call from NBC. And then 3 days later, I get a call from CBS. So thankfully they were kind of staged. So if you look at the timeline, it was scattered versus just a big bang between newspapers, radio stations, and TV. So I wish we could have planned it that way, but we got lucky because every couple of days, fresh outlets were pushing out our message. And that's one thing we probably didn't do well as a lesson learned. And Grace suggested this as a follow-up for next time we do this, is we need to do a better job with analytics. Because you could see a surge after the Denver Post posted their article. You could see a surge after ABC did their thing, but could you really tie it back to that moment in time of them releasing their story? So most of our tracking is analytical, Randy, but basically it was so staged over a 4-week period that it really wasn't a big bang. It just kind of kept dripping on us. But it's fascinating to watch the TV stations all of a sudden say, hey, this is pretty important. I think I can't let them one up me. So I hope that answers
the media wave, I think reinforces this need to A, hit a goal or have a goal that's reasonable, and B, secure early donations and demonstrate early success. Because if we would have only been at 1% of our goal, no matter if it was the same amount that we were raising, the media stations probably wouldn't have paid attention. Similarly, if we had 2 donations in 10 days, no one's going to pay attention. So just want to reinforce that setting a goal you can reach relatively early and getting early momentum, getting those things secured as part of why I think the media was interested. Also, Jeff is a media machine, so.
Oh, great. So Jeff, what was the size of your committee to kick this off to manage all the aspects of it? And then how much time do you think you invested, the committee invest, in order to generate the results that you're working from? Well,
so one thing Grace mentioned to us is you need to have a homespun video, which we had to do last fall before the snow hit. I'd be happy to share that at some point in time, but if you look at the number of people involved, there were 23 different people involved chipping in, right? I would say the core committee were Grace, Sean, and myself, because we're more the marketing team. And we did most of the heavy lifting, but you've got the web team who was very responsive, very involved, and that was a couple people. You had the video team that spent hours on this, getting the video done, and that was 3 people. So I would say core people, Randy, was probably 10. And the spirit of full disclosure, Grace's dad is a member, and he was the project manager for this whole campaign. So we were very thorough in having a spreadsheet to track it in Google Docs to live to our tasks. But I would offer time-wise, preparing for Grace and myself. In fact, I've not added up my hours, but let me just tell you this. When this campaign started, I told my wife, you're not going to see me for 4 weeks. And it was true. Because you had to be available when the newspapers called you. If something went askew with the tracking, you just had to be watching it almost every 15 minutes. And I've never done drugs before, but boy, tracking the GoFundMe site, I can see why people get hooked on crack cocaine, because it's addicting to see how much do we raise now? It's every 15 minutes or every couple minutes. So I really didn't answer. I didn't answer your question, but it's hours of work. I would tell you anecdotally, we work very closely with a good friend of ours, another nonprofit in the state, who wrote a very elegant newsletter, and we were the feature article in it. We probably spent 25 hours writing that newsletter and working on pictures. So I guess my coaching, and Grace can keep me honest here, is you're going to underestimate the amount of time it's going to take to do this effectively. I think one thing we learned is our communication during the campaign was fractured. We could have done a better job, but I literally mean fast and furious. We just didn't anticipate the way that hit us. Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned that you set a goal that was probably reasonable to reach, that would give you an opportunity to exceed it. You know, could be met within a few short weeks. But what was that goal based on? Did you have a number in mind based on the restoration needs, or did you set it for other reasons?
Well, it was a semi dartboard, and this is where Grace doesn't keep me honest, but we did spend a lot of time talking about what's the goal. And the goal was balanced around what labor might we need the next 12 to 18 months, and how are bridge costs going to impact us. So we kind of guessed that a bit. But a lot of it was Grace helping us think through the risk factor of setting too low of a goal or too high of a goal. And we've never done this GoFundMe thing before, right? So we spent a lot of time talking about the numbers. We went as high as 50, we went as low as 15. But I think as we looked at head count and bridge costs, we kept coming back to 25. Grace, do you want to make any comments on setting a goal for?
Yeah, I mean, the cost of rebuilding is $1 gajillion, you know, like, so we knew we couldn't set it off of that. What I would do is look at the average amount donated per individual, like look at those campaign numbers from 2020. And let's say it was, Jeff, do you remember what it was? $70?
Well, the average for GoFundMe is $66.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. 66 was the average for GoFundMe. And so when they set a $10,000 goal, I said, okay, let's divide 10,000 by 66 and see how many donors that is. Like, do we know half that number of people that we feel confident will give us money? So, you know, we did kind of a mathematical equation, really, I think, to see if it was reasonable.
Yeah, we kind of looked at, you know, GoFundMe, if it was $66, let's average $50, which means we need to touch 550 people to hit 25 grand, right?
Yep.
What shocked us, if you take away the big $10,000 donation afterwards, our average contribution without that 10 grand was $100 a person.
But that is rare. That's not common in crowdfunding. I don't want anybody base a number off of that. Usually crowdfunding is a lot of people giving a small amount. So yes, we did have a surprisingly high donor amount, but it's not super common.
Okay, that's great. So a couple of questions that got sparked there. So now that you've got the money, what do you plan to do with it? And how will you follow up with your donors to let them know how the money was spent?
Well, once again, it's focused on getting labor and the lumber. And so there's a couple gating factors right now to spend the money this year. So it may leak into next year as well. And by the way, all these funds are earmarked just for restoration. So we know exactly where, I mean, these dollars are dedicated towards labor and lumber. And that was a cognizant decision on our part. So right now, there's so much work being done in the forest. Finding labor immediately is a challenge because these crews are almost close to being sold out. The other issue is we're still assessing the bridge damage, and that's a cost. But I don't think we're going to tackle the bridge work until fall, which also could lead to next year. So I think we're learning these.
So by labor, Jeff, are you talking about PWV, since it's all volunteer, is looking at hiring contractors?
Yeah,
Either the Conservation Corps crews or other service crews that can
exactly.
come out and do some of the work? Okay.
Exactly. Strong backs, Randy, strong backs.
Mhm.
I mean, Dave Cantrell and I, and Fred Allen, we can't handle all this. So it's, but you know, we have restoration crews working pretty actively to remove trees, but we can't do it fast enough. So I think our learning is we can't spend all this money this year. So it's got like a 12-month window now, more than a 3-month window. And we're going to spend it right and smart. And then once again, keeping the donors up to date, that's part of our newsletter. So as we kind of craft our precision here is how do we keep these folks up to speed, because we want to keep them engaged.
Mhm. Hey, and while we have Sean back, maybe you'd like to talk about the social media aspect of this and how you view the effectiveness of getting people engaged around the crowdfunding program.
Yeah, so with our organization, it was a little bit, this was more experimental part of the great experiment, because as an organization, we'd had social media accounts that existed but weren't really regularly managed. So my role coming on to help with social media management was really new when we were jumping into all of this. I think initially we thought that maybe we were going to be posting much more frequently and regularly with updates, and you know, every time we raised maybe $100 or something, we would post something. But we kind of recognized initially that our primary social media audience at the time was mostly PWV members or close friends or family. So we were kind of speaking into an echo chamber a little bit. So a few things that I think made a difference or that helped was Grace and I collaborated pretty closely on a paid ad campaign, which we had a good average response to. So the ad campaign went for basically the duration of the campaign, and I think brought in a lot more outside visibility than we had just within our own audience followers. And then secondly, we were fortunate that we had been able to include enough of our corporate sponsors, groups like, what are the breweries? Like New Belgium and things like that, where they were able to share the message of our campaign with their followers, and they have a much larger audience than we did. And so that was also able to kind of really expand our reach and get us a lot of new audience to kind of continue on with as well.
All right.
Yeah, I would add, Randy.
Go ahead.
I was just saying one other kind of afterglow with this is I don't think historically PWV has aggressively tried to market our brand. So the financial donations were great. And even more importantly, the amount of people wanting to work was great. But I just think our exposure from this GoFundMe campaign has been healthy. And that was probably another unintended consequence, is just the awareness broadened for PWV across the state. So it became more of a marketing tool than it did just a fundraiser.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Grace, I got a question for you that you might want to respond to, and that's what pre-thought would you give to having a match in advance? So often you see, like the public radio station will have a funding campaign, and they've got somebody who's going to give $1,000 if they can raise $1,000. How effective are those sort of strategies, and what would you suggest for developing that in advance?
You know, honestly, I don't see as much of a match strategy happening on the crowdfunding campaigns like you see on NPR. So I don't actually know how effective that is, and I haven't read much about it. So I'm guessing it's not very common. What was in our lessons learned, though, is we had a number of people give with employer matches. So like I work for Fidelity and Fidelity will match my contribution, or Charles Schwab or wherever. And we did have a number of people donate that way. So that was something I think we will think about next time we do a crowdfunding campaign, is how do we message to people that they should reach out to their employers to see if there's an employer match. I'm personally not very sure that like trying to get New Belgium, for example, to match up to $1,000 would be something worth spending time on versus, I don't think it will motivate the donor that is on the crowdfunding campaign. That's a personal opinion. But like if I were to reach out to New Belgium, I would ask them for their media, you know, like Sean said, like if they can share, then we reach, you know, 4,000 donors. I don't know. So
Yeah,
I guess
think
it depends on the stage too of the
So
campaign.
Jeff, you mentioned having a compelling video. If you would share that with me or share me the link, then I will put that on our webinars page so that people can go and look at it later. But how important is that compelling video or compelling statement in the crowdfunding campaign?
It's incredibly important. You know, crowdfunding campaigns that have videos raise, I think it's at least 4 times more than those without. I think it's shareable, it's moving. I would never launch a crowdfunding campaign without a video, never, personally.
And not Hollywood, right? I mean, it's got to be homespun.
You know, like you can get, like people judge the quality of your organization and the crowdfunding campaign based off of the quality of your video. And so a really crappy video degrades donor trust. And so I would just make sure that if you don't have those video skills, that you reach out to someone who can even put something together on like Apple Slides or whatever. But yeah, you want to put together a high quality video. The video is I sent a link to our crowdfunding campaign in the chat. And if you do open that up, the video is still up in there.
Great. Great. Well, we have time for a couple more questions if people have them. If you just want to type it into the chat or raise your hand and we'll recognize you. I
got a direct message question. Do you want me to read it?
Sure, go ahead.
It says the Cameron Peak Fire provided a clear and compelling fundraising target. Do you have advice for groups that simply need money to function well with no one clear focus? So if your organization just needs money to function, what's the advice? My advice in general is that it's probably not a good fit for a crowdfunding campaign because crowdfunding campaigns are pretty they're focused, urgent needs. However, you know, best practice in fundraising often is to pick out something that you need worked on. And it's the big problem with donors, right? Is that everybody needs operating funds and all the donors want to give to something specific. But if you can at least pull out something that you're engaging in or a specific outcome that you seek as a result of the crowdfunding campaign, there might be a way to be successful with pulling out a few specific call to actions that your organization is hoping to achieve in the next 3 months or whatever.
That's great. We have any other questions?
Hey, Randy, Pete Urban.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wondered, I'd love to tap into Sean's expertise in the social media side, maybe not just related to this specific crowdfunding campaign, but how social media is integrated into the work of PWW or PWV, sorry.
It's something that I think as a result of this campaign, we're really trying to leverage more. We were able to really see how if we are able to share, similar to how important the video was to launching the campaign, the more that we can share really detailed information about what it is that we're doing. So right now, we're actually out doing restoration projects. So we're getting pictures and video on a weekly basis about the work that we're doing. And so by being able to share information like that, I think it really kind of keeps us accountable almost to the people who are relying on us to be doing that work. So we're still in some ways really in the early stages of what that looks like because of the fact that you know, our Instagram account is a few months old, and we're still kind of honing in on that Facebook strategy. But we're definitely getting much more engagement when we're posting about the work that we're doing instead of something that's just like a general update or purely informational. So we're still learning there, really.
Hey, Grace, in the time that we have left, would you just share a few thoughts about the crowd raising platforms? I know you use GoFundMe for this particular one, but there's many out there. What would you suggest and offer as advice to our participants?
In general, I think you want to be on a crowdfunding campaign or crowdfunding platform where there are a lot of eyes. So while there may be some kind of niche trail building crowdfunding platform out there, you probably don't want to be on it because one of the goals is that your campaign gains enough popularity that it reaches out to the broader audience of, you know, crowdfunding donors. So kind of the main platforms, well, there's a lot of them, but main ones that people are familiar with are Kickstarter. Now, Kickstarter is not a good fit for organizations in this sphere because it's mostly startup businesses. You have to be making a product, more or less, to be on Kickstarter. There's Indiegogo, which is another great platform. But there's a lot of like arts type organizations on there, as well as businesses. GoFundMe is just a really good platform for nonprofit fundraising. People are used to seeing it for charity type fundraisers. And you have a community of people who are there for a more philanthropic reason than Kickstarter. So if you're looking at a platform, I would look at kind of the fit. I would look at its general reach. I would look at the fees associated. Right now, all of the platforms have gone to like a 0 fee with a credit card processing. But if you're looking at a smaller platform, you might lose 7 to 10% of your donations on their fees. So pay attention to the fees. So yeah, fit, reach, and fees are probably the 3 things to pay attention to.
All right, well, wonderful. So Jeff and Sean, do you have anything else to add before we close out this coffee hour?
Yeah, I'd offer any questions. Please feel free to reach out to Grace or myself, Sean or Randy, and we'll help with anything that we can.
All right, do you want to put the contact information slide back up on the screen, Jeff? While he's doing that, we'll just say thank you for all of our participants for your questions. Thank you, Sean and Grace and Jeff, for sharing your experience. We wish you all well as you embark on your own crowdfunding campaign and that ever elusive quest for more funds for your wilderness stewardship organization. We just know that, you know, money is something that we all need, and we're hopeful that this information will help you in your quest to raise stewardship funding for your organization this next year. So we'll go ahead and close out the coffee hour now, but be looking. I just sent out a newsletter this morning announcing a whole bunch of things that National Wilderness Stewardship Alliance is going to be involved with. First up is our National Wilderness Workshop, which will be coming to Roanoke, Virginia in November, the week of November 15th. We're planning on face-to-face. We think that COVID is going to be under control enough to meet face-to-face, and we're looking forward to hosting everybody in our workshop format. Our theme this year is advocating for stewardship, tips, tools, and practical techniques for the wilderness steward. And part of that will be an advocacy field trip to Washington, D.C. to put in practice some of the tools and techniques that we'll be training on over the next 4 or 5 months. Our webinar series that NWSA was putting on starting in July is some preparatory work for the workshop about advocating for stewardship. And so in July, we'll be meeting to kind of lay out the strategy over the next couple of months of what we'll be covering. We'll have a Stewardship 101 and 201 in August and September. We'll be developing some specific asks to share with our congressional representatives and the committee staffers and agency leads when we're back in DC in October. And then in November, we'll pull it all together, meet, and then take a trip to DC to share the news and messaging about wilderness stewardship. So we hope that you'll come join us on this journey over the next several months. And we just thank you for all the wilderness stewardship work that you're doing in your local areas. Again, if NWSA can help you, just let us know. And we're thankful for the work that you're doing. So with that, thanks everybody. We'll go ahead and